Welcome to TrineDay's The Journey, conversations with publisher Kris Millegan. I am your host, A.W. Finnegan. With us today is John Loftus, author of America's Nazi Secret. The stirring account reveals how the U.S. government permitted the illegal entry of Nazis into North America in the years following World War II. This extraordinary investigation exposes the secret section of the State Department that began starting in 1948 and unbeknownst to Congress and the public until recently, to hire members of the puppet wartime government of Bielorussia, a region of the Soviet Union occupied by Nazi Germany. A former Justice Department investigator uncovered this stunning story in the files of several government agencies, and it is now available with a chapter previously banned from release by authorities and a forward and afterward with recently declassified materials available at TrineDay in the usual sellers. John Loftus is a former U.S. government prosecutor, a former Army intelligence officer, and the author of numerous books, including The Belarus Secret, The Secret War Against the Jews, and Unholy Trinity, the Vatican, the Nazis, and the Swiss banks. He has appeared regularly as a media commentator on ABC National Radio and Fox News. He lives in St. Petersburg, Florida. And now, Kris Millegan.
Well, thank you, Adam, very much. And, Adam and John have known each other for a while. Adam has done the book called Sleeper Agent about Lyme disease and biowarfare. I mean, the best history of biowarfare I've ever read, and I've read several of them out there. And, he got started by talking with John because when it gets down to it, John is one of the grandfathers of research into warfare. His book, Belarus Secret, was one of the first books to talk about it. Linda Hunt and everything, and all those books followed after John. So I'm very, honored to have John here and have Adam here working with me. And thank you very much. And now, John, just a quick question. Why did you put that in the Belarus Secret about biowarfare? I mean, it really didn't, that wasn't the subject.
It was funny. We were in the trade paperback section of the Belarus Secret. It had been really selling well. And when the trade paperback came out, my publisher, who is himself ex-CIA OPC, said, do you have anything new for us? I said, well, yeah, I just had a conversation with a guy. And he told me the whole history of biowarfare research in America. I said, they were smashing light bulbs full of, biowar in New York subways, all these other experiments they were taking here and there. And I said, this guy had a Q clearance, as I do. They're very rare. It's for people who have access to nuclear weapons secrets. And he verified this by telling me stuff about how we once dropped an atom bomb on North Carolina. And the PAL links, only one of them held. They went to the whole, or that bomb would have gone off. Just the explosives went off, but not the nuclear, the fissionable material. So it was all, no big thing. It was just a big bomb that dropped in the backyard. And people never realized how close that bomb came to going off, to achieving critical mass. And we were taking out a good chunk of North Carolina. If it had,
when did that happen?
Oh, in the 70s, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. It's more than one, by the way, have been dropped accidentally. One was dropped in the ocean off Spain. And there have been a few other little incidents like that. But there have been more close calls with nuclear weapons than people can imagine. So anyway, this guy knew all these details. So he really had to have a Q clearance because all this stuff was hush-hush at the time. So when he started talking to me about biological weapons, he told me about this place called Plum Island. I said, well, sure. I used to spend summers about 84 miles from Plum Island on Cape Cod. We were constantly picking ticks off the dogs and off the kids and stuff. But he said this is where it began. The British Secret Service shared this island for biological warfare research. And so, that's kind of interesting. I've heard from other people about Plum Island, but I put his comments into into the one edition of the Belarus Secret that came out. And apparently, I was the first person in America to publish information linking Lyme disease, Plum Island, and biowarfare research. And the studies came out about 8 months after it was published in the book. So so to the people who have Lyme disease, I'm sort of the first person that went public with it, and over the years, it did fit into this whole program of what was this rogue agency called the Office of Policy Coordination doing, and they did things like biological warfare. This was the group, by the way, that dropped bug bombs on China and North Korea, and the Chinese complained to the UN about insects crawling up on top of the snow. And of course, the Chinese knew it was coming. The Russian Secret Service had been alerted to it by Kim Philby and the Cambridge Five. So they had already prepared the serum that would combat it. So no one in China or in North Korea had any of these epidemics that were supposed to happen, nor did any of the prisoners of war get sick with it. So that's when we knew that biowarfare was really becoming a thing. Now, we covered it all up, or tried to. The UN held hearings on this, and we denied everything, which was difficult because one of the officers involved had confessed to everything. He was the guy who worked in Washington, D.C., and all this information about the bug bombs had to be done hand to hand, nothing in writing. Well, then this guy heard that from one of his buddies that his buddy was about to break his record for enemy aircraft being shot down. So the stupid colonel, I think it was, got himself transferred to North Korea to shoot down more North Korean planes. Unfortunately, he got shot down. And the idiot confessed to everything in great detail. So it was, but, when, President Eisenhower says, oh, no, it wasn't us, we had nothing to do with it. Well, we shared this program with the Canadians and the British. All our biological warfare, we called it toxicological warfare then, was shared with those three allies, the ABC countries, America, Britain, and Canada. We tested the stuff out in Alberta in a park there on the Canadian border. And it was horrifying to think that we had dropped like all these feathers that would have insects attached to them that would float down the ground and then hopefully infect people. I mean, it was the first use of biological warfare by Western nations.
So, I mean, I've heard of some of this stuff, but most people haven't. So now, after you did your book, Linda Hunt did Secret Agenda. How did she learn about that?
Well, Lynn and I were friends for a long time, but on Secret Agenda, she gets credit for being the one who really went to Germany, went to the special island they had there for developing biological weapons, did the early interviews, brilliant researcher. And what happened was a British author was upset that some broad, as he put it, would, beat him to the. So he copied some of her material and issued his own book and stole all the credit from her because that happens. So Linda Hunt, the woman who really deserves attention as one of the real groundbreakers of biological warfare, she was just ignored.
Right. So Adam's book, okay. In that book there, he gives us a real long history of biowarfare that starts with horses. Okay.
Yeah.
Adam, can you give us a little bit of that history?
Yeah. First, it talked about Britain using smallpox as a weapon, and then so all the way back to even the time of George Washington. Like George Washington was the first one quoted on the use of biological weapons against America with smallpox by the British. But then I go into those are just the earlier times. But then I go into the years leading up to World War One, with Britain sending Germany, well, horses and cattle diseased, and Britain blaming Britain openly blaming the United States for shipping diseased cattle, trying to antagonize Germany against America, and they did, and so there was this back and forth going on. There was this false flag antagonism, and Germany began to object to the American horses and cattle, and they thought we were responsible for a large foot and mouth disease epidemic out in Germany, and that's what started. That's what actually was the kickoff to setting up the German biowarfare island, their version of Plum Island, which was called Insel Reims, and they and some of the so horses were also a big part of this, and horses were not just used for pulling carts, but they were also used for making serums and vaccines, and so this plays into some of the early stages of the what was called Spanish influenza or influenza of 1918, and I show that after that event everybody saw how much damage death and disease, I mean, how much damage disease could do. And so the Soviet Union thought that it was a biological weapon, and they were like, okay, we need to go all out into biological weapons. This is going to be our main focus. And because labs could be easily maintained without much technological advancement, that was kind of like something they really uh, took hold of in the Soviet Union. And they had epidemics, not only with the 1918 influenza, but the typhus and all sorts of insect-borne plagues over there. So they were really driven to be first in biological weapons. And it my book it focuses in large part around this one bioweaponeer, this one scientist virologist from Germany, Erich Traub. He was like the all-star bioweaponeer, the most talented, just he was the most sought after by all countries. And
But there was one little problem with him, Adam, right?
yeah.
He was offered a promotion 3 times to run Plum Island, and he declined them all because it would require a top secret clearance with a background check. So my friend, Dan Benjamin, was assigned to interrogate him to find out what was going on. And Dr. Traub cracked and said, yeah, he had been a scientist with the Nazis, but after the war, he was recruited by the KGB that sent him to America. There's a communist spy, big
Right.
scandal, and they deported him and destroyed his records. But what you did was incredible, was you were able to rebuild the file. You collected every document in the world by Russia, by CIA, and all other nations, and you had footnotes, you had documents showing every step of what Traub did. It was a remarkable scholarship achievement.
Yes, this is the book Sleeper Agent: The Rise of Lyme Disease during
Chronic illness and the great imitator antigens of biological warfare. And I collected all of Erich Traub's published work, translated all of it, and I dissected a lot of how his weapons work, like immunologically, and I found him to be the discoverer of chronic disease or the underlying science of chronic disease. And that's another thing we should probably bring up is that unlike what most people conceived to be biological warfare, where you create weapons that kill lots of people really quickly and so on. These are different. These are what are called strategic weapons. These aren't meant to kill, actually. They're meant to tire and exhaust and overwhelm the target country. Because you got to think of it. When somebody dies, it's like they only go one of two places. They're either buried or they're burned, and there's no more burden left over from their illness that the government has to take care of. But with people who are still alive but very incapacitated, worn out, somebody has to take care of them, and so they were hoping to overwhelm the public health system,
They were,
overwhelm the economy, and these are sometimes called economic weapons. And it also brings later on a triplet epidemic of chronic disease, mental illness slash neurological disorders, and cancers. And that's all of this science had been configured by Eric Traub, and they buried it. They had termed it in 1960 immune tolerance. It is just chronic immune deficiency. You disable the immune system, and it just wreaks havoc on the brain and on the population.
well, this was the genius part of it, or the evil genius, I guess. By suppressing the immune system, everybody has all sorts of other odds and ends illnesses in their body. If your immune system gets depressed, all of a sudden you see increases in ALS, Guillain-Barré, all these other Lyme disease, all these other little illnesses that maybe one or two people might have heard of them, but you never saw people around you getting sick. But they exploded in America the same way that cancer did. Once the immune system went down, all the other illnesses went up, and that made it really hard to trace.
Sounds like the world we're living in right now,
Yeah.
to a certain extent. Now, and the American population, well, the world population, we've been, through this last pandemic, okay, COVID-19, and it seems to me beyond bio weapon, it's also befuddling and making people, like think that Fauci did it all and he should be, put in front of a firing squad and all of this. But to me, that seems like a bunch of intelligence hoo-ha to a certain. Can you talk about that, John?
Yeah, the idea that Dr. Fauci did this. What happened is a lot of the right wingers are trying to cover up it with the fact they did something stupid. And what they did is, as soon as the Trump administration came in, they fired our overseas branch in Wuhan, China, and brought all our scientists home. They stopped funding for international research on outbreaks, and the companies that manufactured, things like masks and other items you need, Trump signed a waiver saying you don't have to sell it to America first. Go ahead and sell it to the Chinese. So when the outbreak hit, we didn't have supplies to deal with it. The Chinese took them all. We didn't have people on the ground to find out what happened. And so they were spreading rumors. And the rumors, I think, did the most damage because people didn't take a lot of this stuff seriously. Trump admitted to one of his biographers that he really knew how dangerous this was, but he didn't want to scare the Americans. That wasn't the reason. He didn't want the Americans to find out how much he had sabotaged CDC, Dr. Fauci, and the rest. He just cut the funding for all these things on the eve of one of the world's worst disasters.
Right.
So,
And I mean, I get, because I publish conspiracy books and stuff like that. I mean, I get people telling me that, well, the COVID-19, the vaccine was, patented way before the pandemic happened and all of this stuff. Do you know anything about that, John?
well, it wasn't so much the patenting because, viruses had been known since I think like the 1900s, 1950s that they existed. But what the Russians came up with was a way to scramble the DNA and RNA of viruses that was untraceable. What was being done with virus splicing at Wuhan used the CRISPR technique, which is like you can see it. It's like a staple gun on a virus, if you will, through an electron microscope. But the Russian stuff was invisible. You could never see the splices. So people made this crazy conjecture. Well, this couldn't have been made in a laboratory, or we'd see the splice. So this must have evolved naturally. So they kept searching for the mythical beast that some infected bat had bit, an animal that became an intermediary that, then infected people. But they never could find that intermediary because it doesn't exist. They wasted all this time with the food court and stuff. What happened is the scientists had created an economic weapon. They had spliced together, I think as Adam documents, the attachment part from the AIDS infection and put it into the SARS virus. And it was a very powerful weapon, spread all over China. It was high infectivity, low mortality. So the whole nation was taking care of sick people. There was no way they could fight a war. And
I know
but
we had talked about the explosion that happened as well with Vector, and I know, like, I don't consider. I think there are definitely things that Anthony Fauci has done that are not good, but I think there was definitely more to the story, and I think you're right that it kind of just put all the blame on him. But there's other areas that I would say that because he had some he has a history with the Lyme disease vaccine and some of the HIV vaccines that were really nasty, and but
I think it came from them not understanding it,
no, I mean, we had in September, we had that explosion, and it was huge. I sent John a video of it. The explosion was it was massive, and not long after that, there were all of these publications being published about these SARS epidemics in Russia. They were saying SARS cases that were right around the area of I forget, Siberia, and this was all the way.
Right.
This was all the way to December.
Can you explain this explosion, John?
Yeah, this was the Vector Laboratory in Novosibirsk. It's the only Soviet agency that invents new vaccines by scrambling RNA and DNA. So it's the perfect place to hide biological warfare. I'm talking to people at CIA, they're saying, oh, no, we know those guys. Those are good guys. They make vaccines. The guy that was in charge of the Vector labs was a real crook. He was a member of the Russian mafia, and he was firing legit scientists to pad the payroll with his mafia friends. He was under investigation and about to get arrested. And suddenly there was an explosion. A warehouse at the site blew up. Now, this is in September. It's still cold, and the winds are blowing south. So within a month, we had infected people coming from Novosibirsk, Russia, down into China. And by October and November, you're seeing cases erupting in China.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chinese didn't have a clue that was going on. The conjecture is that this director of the lab, the Vector lab, went to the Chinese and said, look, we have the vaccine for this. If you want it, we'll sell it to you. All of a sudden, everybody in China gets cured of COVID-19. Everybody gets healthy. Amazing statistic. And but then things went wrong. RNA viruses, as Adam points out in his book, The Sleeper Agent, are very, very malleable. They change themselves repeatedly. And Russia, which didn't have a single case of COVID-19, even though they've got 4,000 miles of border with China, all of a sudden there was one guy in Moscow who went for a ski trip to Italy, and he brought back a mutated version of COVID-19. And it went through St. Petersburg and Moscow like wildfire. They didn't have enough hospital beds. People were dying everywhere. So the statistics are crazy. All of a sudden, China gets it, they drop to zero. Russia's at zero, then they get up to, a huge percentage of their population infected with it. So I think it's pretty clearly a man-made version now. We know the laboratory where it was made. There were Russian scientists who worked at the Wuhan lab who could have brought back samples back with them. And the documents that Adam found said that the Russians were trying to devise an economic weapon that they could use against either China or the United States. And, hurt us economically so that we couldn't ever go to war against them. So
Yeah. I mean, it's Lord have mercy. We've been propagandized, since we've been born one way or another, and it's still going on. And it's really sad because all this stuff trying to, left and right, it just keeps people in a continual state of befuddlement, so we really don't know what's going on. And it's really sad. Uh, Now, John, you're coming out with a new book called My Clients Were Spies.
for
What's
almost
that
50
about?
years, well, for almost 50 years, I've had a very unusual practice. You have to have a security clearance above top secret to be one of my clients. You have to pay me $1, so I covered on the attorney-client privilege. And for the first 30 years, I had to submit all my book manuscripts back to CIA to make sure that I was keeping really serious classified stuff about them. And over the years, now I'm free. She gave me a letter saying I'm free to write what I want. So I'm writing my little autobiography of all the interesting spies I met. The first one I met was Julia Childs. I think I was 15 years old when I was her escort at Harvard. I went to Boston Latin School, and we're the school that existed before Harvard. And so I was her escort. Very nice lady, but a giant to me. I was just a little kid. And everyone thought she was just a secretary for one of the American intelligence leaders. She was much more than that. She actually organized the archives, and she had help. There was a British officer who told her how to organize our intelligence archives, and it was Charles Howard Ellis. Dickie was his nickname. Now, Dickie was a communist double agent, and she credits him as the man who designed the American intelligence services. So, I mean, they had us going right from the beginning. So the book really has to start with the Tsar's time to find out how the British royal family and the Russian royal family got together to create their own spy service. The Russians agreed that they would spy in London and try and overthrow the King of England. And the king said he'd have his spies in Moscow and St. Petersburg try and overthrow the Tsar. Then they get together and arrest all the people they had provoked into revolution. It was a really clever system, and it worked well for a long time. But it got penetrated by a woman. Her name was Nadia Krupskaya. And she was, Trotsky credits her as the founder of the very first Bolshevik intelligence system. And people keep forgetting that Marxism was born in London. So she had a newspaper that she ran, and the board of the newspaper was actually the first Politburo. It was Lenin and all the different factions on the board. And she was the Secretary General of Iskra, the Spark it was called. That was the cover for reaching all the people in the Russian colonies in London. And so she found out, for reasons we still don't know how, that the British Secret Service was recruiting Asian saboteurs in London to organize and overthrow the Tsar. And he was doing the same. They call these guys the Ruskaya colony, the RK officers. There was one for every Russian embassy except London, because you didn't need one there because the King of England was the RK officer watching out for the Tsar. It was a really clever system, but once the Russians penetrated it, it was a field day. It was, you had Stalin was able to eliminate all his political opponents in Russia just by having his friend Krupskaya, identify them as part of this agent network. So all the bloody purges were due to this woman, and she was technically Lenin's wife because he was in the end stage symptoms of syphilis, but she really just hated the guy. She said if Lenin didn't die, we'd have to imprison him. So she was Stalin's secret ally to build Stalin's power base. And she was rewarded by having Stalin poison first Lenin and then herself. And knocked him off. And it was Stalin's chief of staff who confirmed it. He had been assigned to kill Krupskaya on her birthday. So no one would know how Stalin had come to power. And you know how she died?
No.
Stalin had this friend who had a cousin who was in a fancy restaurant in Moscow. And the guy made wonderful Russian desserts, including tea cakes made with almond flour. So the almond flour, they tested it first on the Mad Monk Rasputin. As the British Secret Service, Stalin was their age at the time, wanted them to poison Rasputin. Well, there wasn't enough poison, it took a long time to die. But next time they gave so much to Lenin that he turned blue from the potassium cyanide. That's why every year they have to close Lenin's tomb. They got to pump fresh liquids in to keep him from looking like a Smurf.
Boy,
And
how much history do we not know?
a third of modern history is classified. And here's the best part. Why it's classified? Because the chef that did the poisoning was Putin's grandfather.
His name was Spiridon.
Yep, Spiridon Putin. His son worked for the KGB. His grandson became president of Russia. And they were the family, like the Borgia family of Italy. They came to power through poisoned assassinations.
Right. Wow.
So that's why the British intelligence files are being released. They say that, yeah, Stalin worked for us. We asked him to kill Rasputin, the Mad Monk. But then everything else is torn out of the file.
Well,
Kim Philby did that. He and Dickie Ellis were the ones who cleaned up all the British intelligence files. So that's why there's so many holes in British history. I got guys flying over to see me from Britain. Now their archives are going up, have been opened up after 75 years. Going, what the heck? What happened to how did people get into the archives to rip them out? And it was Ellis and his communist buddy, Kim Philby, that really did a job on history. First, you got to find the secret files. Then you got to find the holes in the secret files. So that's what I do. I look for the holes in history.
Well, we got to think about our listeners. We can't go on too long. Adam, you've known John. Is there any question you'd like to ask John?
No, I'm really looking forward to his next book. It seems really interesting and yeah, I mean if it wasn't for John Loftus's hints onto where to look, I wouldn't have been able to put this story together, because when I started the sleeper agent, I was sure that it was, that the U.S. government was the one to blame. And then when he started to really, he tell me that there's a lot in the classified realm you don't know, and he started to say some things, and then at first I found the whole Russian thing hard to believe, and how their bioweapons program became so advanced. But I kind of put myself aside and I said, all right, don't be so hard-headed. Just give this a follow and see where it leads. And I did that, honestly. and it never stopped producing leads. And then it really, I started to see how it becomes very complex with different, countries penetrating other ones, and it just becomes a real. But yeah, I don't really have any questions other than to say that I'm really excited for his next book. I can't wait to read it.
I
Right.
think it'll be fun. Yeah, you'll get a kick at it. Actually, I introduced you to one of my sources. He's now passed away, so the attorney-client confidentiality ads.
Hmm.
But he was a colonel at Fort Detrick in the Biological Warfare Lab. So he was a real good guy, and he helped explain to me how a lot of this stuff took place. But and I'm going to go through things like how the Spanish flu of 1918 was really the Kansas flu of 1917,
Mm.
but we covered it up and threatened reporters with imprisonment if they wrote the truth, because it would hurt our recruiting of soldiers to go fight in World War One. But when our
Right.
soldiers went overseas, they brought the Kansas flu with them. And, it was only called the Spanish flu because they're the only country that wouldn't censor out what had happened.
Yeah.
But
No.
it was really the Kansas flu.
Well, and Adam, uh, I had a very similar experience. My daddy told me some stuff, and I didn't believe him. And so I started researching CIA drugs and different things, and I had people calling me names, a conspiracy theorist among others, and I would have gladly have stopped, but I kept digging, and I kept finding validation in what he was saying, and the information that I was finding. And, we can't step away from the perfidy that the United States has done too, okay, in our name, okay, through
Yeah, absolutely.
intelligence services and through the secret society system. And, when I started looking at it, I had people wanting to tell me, well, all those people are evil. And I had to say, well, no, they're people. Okay. And they make choices all the time. Okay. And I do think that some of them, uh, if you want to say, went to the dark side, did do that and have other, agendas. But, the main thing of the United States of America is it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Okay. And we keep trying to perfect that union and onwards to a better future for our children.